Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, the managing editor for Shadowproof, and I'd like to welcome you to the Dissenter weekly update for January 30th, 2020.
I'm Brian Sonnenstein. I'm the publishing editor at Shadowproof.
And each week we run down the latest news in whistleblowing and press freedom. For today's show, we're going to discuss Luanda leaks on corruption in Angola and Amazon workers who are defying corporate policy against speaking out against Amazon's climate policy. But first, Brian has some things to say for you.
Yep. Just really quick. Today is actually the first day that we are streaming also on Facebook. So hello to everybody who may be watching over there. Like our page if you're not already. Subscribe to us on YouTube as well. You can also follow us on Twitter at shadowproofcom. And then I just also wanted to mention really quick before we dive in here that Shadowproof is 100% reader funded. The journalism that we do depends entirely on small donations from our readers. We don't have any major funders or anything like that. We're entirely accountable to our readers. So if you enjoy this show, if you like what you read at Shadowproof, head on over to shadowproof.com/donate and chip in whatever you can. We have options both for one-time donations and for memberships. So with that being said, Kevin, I wanted to dive right in here. We've got some good stuff for today. Our first story involves the Houston police. We have advocacy group wants whistleblower committee for Houston police. Hai Bui, an activist with the We the People organization in Houston, has urged the city council to form a police whistleblower committee that could investigate anonymous complaints by officers. Can you walk us through this story, Kevin?
Yeah, and the whole idea here is that this committee, if appointed, would be able to ensure that officers who are witnesses or are aware of misconduct would be able to report without fear of retribution. This has been a systemic problem. We've seen high profile cases in places like New York, Chicago, LA, other parts, urban centers in the United States. But here we have this effort that has been unfolding in Houston, and it's in response to a no-knock raid where officers killed two people, Dennis Tuttle and Rogina Nicholas. This group says that they've been involved in actually getting the Houston police to reduce the number of no-knock raids that they engage in. I think they were able to get the number down to 0 last year, and they've been doing this kind of activism in Houston. So this is something that we'll keep tabs on with the show. And like I said, we've seen prominent cases around the country. We've seen cases in Chicago, where I'm based, with people who were trying to inform on corruption and then got completely suppressed. People who are involved in these kinds of whistleblower cases, especially when they're police officers, I think these kind of fly under the radar. We follow national security whistleblower cases fairly closely because of the sensational element of having classified information involved, and when they involve exposing war crimes, etc. But police, just because of the nature of what policing is, when you have individuals who want to come forward and expose corruption, they get hit pretty hard right away when they try to turn against people in their organization.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad you said that last part. If I could just quickly add before we move on to our next story, Kevin, you and I both done a lot of reporting on the police and on corrections officers. There is absolutely a culture of silence, a code of silence that's understood among corrections officers in a way that doesn't exist necessarily in a lot of other places. And going against that and blowing the whistle is incredibly dangerous and at the same time something that we definitely need to see a lot more of. So I'm glad we're highlighting this. I appreciate you bringing that up.
You should, everyone who's watching should go read Brian's report from this past week on the commission that Donald Trump just appointed of law enforcement that is going to review policing throughout the country and see the law enforcement officials that were packed. And I imagine that every single one of those 18 people are completely opposed to having whistleblowing in their organizations because they would see them as disruptive to the good order and discipline of the police. And and that they need to be unified and fighting crime, and we don't need people who are police whistleblowers disrupting what
Mhm.
we do.
Yeah, and a few of the people on that committee actively have fought, oversight mechanisms, and a lot of the transparency that would create a climate for a whistleblower to comfortably come forward and speak about waste of fraud and abuse. So, thank you for raising that. Enough about me. Let's go on to our next story. Our next story involves Amazon. We have hundreds of Amazon workers defy rules to protest corporations' climate policy. More workers are speaking out against Amazon for its contracts with large oil and gas firms in spite of a corporate policy to threaten to fire employees who dissent in public communications. We've done some coverage of Amazon workers and sort of the conditions that they endure working for that company. Can you walk us through what's going on now with this story, Kevin?
It wasn't long ago, I think it was earlier in this month, in fact, that we saw a few employees had come forward to say that they were threatened with potentially being fired. And they were going to not have anything to, they weren't going to submit to this. They were going to let people know that the Amazon Corporation was planning to do this to them for raising concerns about climate policy. So now we see an escalation, I think rightfully so. Over 300 people organized under the banner of Amazon Employees for Climate Justice. And they came out and said that they have taken issue through internal channels with policies, but Amazon is still working with corporations like BP and Shell, and they're ignoring employees who have complained about the Amazon Web Services carbon footprint that is being left from managing. I imagine they're talking about the cloud, working on those services for various different corporations and other companies throughout the US and the world. And I want to point out and read this statement that an Amazon spokesperson gave, responding to the fact that these workers were coming forward, and make sure people are well aware of the language that's being used by Amazon. The quote was, "While all employees are welcome to engage constructively with any of the many teams inside Amazon that work on sustainability and other topics, we do enforce our external communications policy and will not allow employees to publicly disparage or misrepresent the company or the hard work of their colleagues who are developing solutions to these hard problems." So the word there is disparage, and then that other word, misrepresent. Those buzzwords that are being thrown there clearly intended to instill fear in employees who are trying to, in good faith, these aren't employees who want to leave their jobs at Amazon. These aren't people who oppose what Amazon does as a corporation. These are people who believe in what the company does, and they have jobs there, and all they want is Amazon to not contribute to climate change. And when they're actively doing things that fuel climate change and make it worse, they believe that Amazon, being a multi-billion-dollar company, can correct the way that they do business so that they're no longer responsible, a key contributor to climate change.
Absolutely. And, this kind of effort deserves a lot of support because these gigantic multinational corporations, in addition to our military and other large military forces in in the world, are the leading contributors to climate change and polluters. And so, we should really be standing by these Amazon workers in their effort to force a change within these companies. So, thank you for that story. Moving on, we have two stories here involving Luanda leaks and the global wealth defense industry. So we have Isabel dos Santos, the richest woman on the African continent, is the chair of Angola's state oil company, the Sonangol Group. She was fired in 2017. Why don't you walk us through this story?
Right. So the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists partnered with 36 other media organizations to publish reporting that was based on hundreds of thousands of leaked emails, slide presentations, invoices, and contracts looking into the business operation of Dos Santos. This mirrors, it's very similar to the kind of reporting we've seen around something like the Panama Papers, looking at offshore tax havens that are being used by rich people. But these materials came from a hacker, a Portuguese hacker, who said publicly that that they were responsible for the release of this material, providing it. There's a great report over at time.com that looks into this woman who, as you said, is the richest woman on the African continent. She is accused of funneling millions of dollars to shell companies in tax havens in Dubai, Malta, and the British Virgin Islands. The story says, quote, the documents allege that the Malta office of the London-based consulting firm PricewaterhouseCoopers was hired to audit Dos Santos' company accounts. U.S. consulting giants Boston Consulting Group and McKinsey, there's McKinsey. McKinsey, of course, has been in the news in the United States because of Pete Buttigieg's connections to McKinsey, and he's a Democratic presidential candidate. They were allegedly hired by advisors of Dos Santos to rescue the struggling Sonangol in 2016. And Matter Business Solutions was hired to coordinate work with these firms. So this is incredible journalism, and a really important journalism on the super rich, or the 1% throughout the world. If we move on to this next part, this next element of the story, where we have Dos Santos threatening to sue this consortium for publishing these materials, we have Dos Santos coming through and saying that she believes she's the target of a politically motivated campaign, and that she's going to launch what we in the United States would call a strategic lawsuit against public participation, or SLAPP. And what the goal would be is, because she's so rich, she could burden the consortium, she could go after other journalists and make the legal costs so significant that they would be forced to settle, retract certain claims, or end their opposition. At this moment, we don't have any idea what Dos Santos' case is going to be, what she's claiming. Possibly she claims that she was defamed. We've seen similar cases like this. Like, I'm reminded of the DNC's own lawsuit against making claims related to how WikiLeaks published the Podesta emails. Maybe she's trying to take that sort of tack because of there was hacking involved in the publishing of these materials. But journalists are allowed to publish hacked materials. That is well within what we understand as press freedom, and in the United States, it's covered by the First Amendment.
Thank you. That being said, I think that's probably a very good segue into our regular Julian Assange segment of the show.
There's actually one more story that we have here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And if you did not load it in, it's okay. But I wanted to highlight the fact that officials under Trump have increased their retaliation against whistleblowers in the past few years. There was a oversight committee hearing by the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee on whistleblowers that took place over the past week. And we got some insights from some of these officials that are working at the Inspector General offices. The Principal Deputy Inspector General for the Pentagon, Glenn Fine, testified that we've seen a disturbing trend of the Defense Department disagreeing with the results of our investigation, or not taking disciplinary action in whistleblower reprisal, he means retaliation cases, without adequate or persuasive explanation. So, that's kind of jargony, but what he's saying is, we're bringing up evidence that people were retaliated, and the Pentagon doesn't seem to care. So then Michael Horowitz, who is the Justice Department Inspector General, said that the efforts to promote accountability and to deter future misconduct have been hampered by their inability to receive testimony from former employees. So they don't have subpoena authority to get testimony, which makes it harder to collect the information that they need to look into whistleblower retaliation, to pursue these whistleblower cases. So that was one thing that I wanted to get to and make sure we covered this week. And there's also Glenn Fine submitted some testimony to the Oversight Committee in the House. And what I found would be worthwhile to read here on this show is just to go through some of these cases that were brought up. Some that I'm actually not that familiar with, but I wanted to just kind of paraphrase them. They seem to be cases that the military has worked on within the last year or so. So there's something in here mentioned involving soft text solutions in November 2019, where they completed a criminal investigation that looked into a contractor mischarging Defense Department federal contracts, so soft tech. And as a result, this contractor was suspended from federal work and was required to pay 1.2 million in restitution, was fined $250,000, and was sentenced to 6 months incarceration. So you have somebody who's abusing this whole agency, the way that contracting works. Then there was the Correct Group in August 2019, when a former active duty Army colonel was sentenced to 60 months in prison, ordered to forfeit more than $1.2 million. The investigation came from an anonymous whistleblower complaint. It alleged that 3 senior military officers had created a business, the CREC group, that falsely claimed to be a small disadvantaged business and as a result was improperly receiving federal contracts. There's apparently a whistleblower case related to drones, the MQ-9 Block 5 Reaper, and this is a aircraft that is supposedly able to fly for up to 14 hours with the persistent capability to be able to track, to find and kill alleged terrorism suspects. The DoD did an audit to substantiate allegations that the Air Force was not properly estimating and procuring the aircraft parts. In December 2018, the Air Force owned 3,746 excess spare parts that were worth around $30 million. And they had also significantly understocked other vital parts. So essentially, what we're getting to here is that they weren't accounting right, and there was an inability to meet their repair demands. So, this is a whole other issue of like whether we want drones to be even operating or not. But what this whistleblower was pointing out is that there was corruption involved in the way management was happening with this drone. So there's a few stories in that testimony submitted to Congress that I had not seen covered at all in the news media.
No, me neither. Thank you for raising that. Absolutely. Cool to move on to our Assange story next.
Yeah.
Next, we have Assange moved out of solitary confinement thanks to legal team and fellow prisoners. What's going on here with Assange this week?
Remarkably, in the past week, we saw Julian moved out of solitary confinement thanks to the petitioning of his legal team, but also because of fellow prisoners, which I think you and your work covering prisons, you probably find that rather remarkable. The solidarity that was shown by prisoners to help Julian Assange and get him out of his confinement conditions that were adding to the deterioration of his health. I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add.
No, I mean, I guess the only thing that I would add is that solidarity among prisoners is, maybe not as unusual as some people might think. When people are subject to those conditions, forced to live in small quarters and, routinely abused, absolutely, there can be animosity and differences that come of that. But people also band together and they organize together. They help get each other medical treatment. So this is very great to see. I'm very glad to see this. And, it doesn't, not that it matters whether it surprises me or not, but, it's definitely falls in line with a lot of what we see in prisons in the United States.
And the other thing that happened in the past week was that the Council of Europe's Parliamentary Assembly put together this report on threats to media freedom and journalist security in Europe. And amendments were added to this report that particularly pay attention to Assange. And they call for the prompt release of Julian Assange from the Belmarsh maximum security prison in London, and And then there's another amendment that recommends that, it says that his extradition to the United States would, quote, set a precedent and threaten journalists' freedoms in all member states. So that's an important expression, and what we're going to see at the extradition hearing that's coming up in February on the 24th. And of course, I'm planning to go there and cover this first week that is going to take place in February, and in this hearing that's going to span several months now. What we're going to see are parliamentarians from all over Europe who are going to travel to London to monitor this hearing, to see how this journalist, dissident journalist, but someone who has published incredible and important information, is being put on trial, and the U.S. is pursuing his extradition to the United States to target him further for his journalism. So that's the update for this week with Julian Assange.
Thank you. And as we've said on past shows, we'll continue with this regular segment checking in on Julian. We're absolutely looking forward to your coverage and you heading over there. And like I said, we're 100% reader funded, and our readers are going to be sending there. So we're grateful for all you out there who watch and support and read our work. Our next point of order that we have on here is about Chelsea Manning, and you're wearing a very apt sweater today, back from the earlier days of the struggle with Chelsea Manning. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this new website?
And I think this is a great. So it's called releasechelsea.com. I wanted to make sure people had this available so that they can track developments with Chelsea Manning's case. As a journalist who covers this really regularly and intensely, and has been covering it since way back as early as 2011, if not before, you can go here and catch up on what is happening while she is in jail, because she's defying a grand jury that was impaneled to destroy WikiLeaks, to destroy a media organization. And it's got information, past statements from Chelsea, statements of support from individuals, prominent individuals and organizations that support Chelsea Manning. There's a nice FAQ section that walks through some of the issues related to her case, if you want to inform people about what is at stake with her being in jail. And then also some of the more larger issues that are related to her individually. And every week we go through and we update people on how long Chelsea has been in jail. So I'll get to that and say that Chelsea has been in jail for 323 days. She now owes $214,000 in fines, because every day that she is in jail defying this grand jury, she's charged $1,000. And so that is a bill that she is accruing. It's important to emphasize, since we're talking about this website that was launched, that the judge who is overseeing her case never went through the process of figuring out what Chelsea could afford. And now we've gone well beyond, for several months this has been true, we have gone well beyond coercion. This is now punishment. This sort of fine, putting somebody in jail, it's supposed to be done in order to get somebody to go before the grand jury. But in principle, and these are very good principled reasons that Chelsea has, she does not have any intent to cooperate with this grand jury. And because there's no possibility that she would cooperate with the jury and go testify, it's now punishment. And so the judge should have put a stop to this a long time ago, and yet she remains in jail. Julian Assange has been in jail for 294 days since he was expelled from the Ecuador embassy in London. Some other cases that we like to keep people mindful of as we close these shows every single week are Jeremy Hammond, who is also in jail, the same facility as Chelsea, because he was subpoenaed by the grand jury into WikiLeaks. Like Chelsea, he has principles and is defying this grand jury, choosing to not testify. Then there's the case of FBI whistleblower Terry Albury, and he is serving a sentence right now in prison. Daniel Hale is the alleged drone whistleblower who provided documents to The Intercept about the drone assassination complex that President Barack Obama developed, which Donald Trump now has to use, as we saw killing people like the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani, using the same kind of kill list apparatus, so to speak. So that's one case, and he has not been put on trial yet. That is still upcoming. That is definitely a case that, along with being around to cover Julian Assange's case in 2020, is my intent to cover Daniel Hale's trial or any sort of high-profile preliminary hearing that might happen. And if there was a plea deal, then I would go cover that plea hearing the same way I covered. And that brings us to our last case of today, Reality Winner, who is someone who pled guilty and was charged with violating the Espionage Act, just like Hale and Albury. These are people who have been prosecuted under President Donald Trump, and Reality is in a prison in Texas. And this weekend, this is what I'll mention, that this weekend I'm actually going to be doing a couple speaking engagements at the University of Michigan. I'll be in Ann Arbor there speaking in relation to this production called Is This a Room? Reality Winner Verbatim Transcription. Tina Soder is the director of the play. She based this entire play on a transcript of the interrogation with FBI agents. There was an issue around her case involving not reading her Miranda rights. And so they just went in and started collecting incriminating information, never really giving her a chance to leave her home, even though they had never placed her under arrest. And so they violated her rights. And that was a hearing that was held that I covered. There's a full report at the shadowproof.com if you're interested in this background. But that scene is told artistically in this production. And so on Friday, January 30th, I'll be speaking before that performance. And then on Saturday afternoon, January 31st, Reality Winner's mother, Billy Winner Davis, is going to join me, or I suppose I should be respectful and say I'm going to join Billy Winner Davis on stage to talk about Reality Winner's case. And there'll be an opportunity to dig into the issues around the war on whistleblowers, but to also talk about some other things that are connected with it, including the document that she disclosed and the contents of that document. I have some disagreements about where some of the people who support Reality Winner think this document took us and what it was able to inspire. They connect it back to Russian election meddling. Think that there's a lot of discussion that can be had about what this document did and did not confirm, and we're going to get into some of that. And both of those events, those speaking engagements, are going to be videoed, and we'll have recordings of those, so clips that we can share through Shadowproof with you. Anyone who wants to see them will be able to share those on shadowproof.com so people can watch these speaking engagements.
I'm very excited. I'm excited to see to watch that stream, and I just I know that we've gotten a lot of new followers and listeners and watchers out there in the audience from your reporting over the last weekend. I just wanted to let them know, if they're not already familiar with your work, they can go to Shadowproof. Kevin has done close to a decade now of reporting on Chelsea Manning's case. He's one of the only reporters to really thoroughly report on Reality Winner's case. All of that is archived at Shadowproof, and I would really encourage folks to go back and read some of the work that Kevin has done, because it's nothing like the coverage that you will see in larger outlets that kind of helicoptered, and Kevin has really dug in and done excellent work. So please check that out.
And as we close, I'll add we provided several examples of what we're trying to do with this show. My guess is that many of the stories that we read, well, all of the stories that we read this week, you were unfamiliar with because you don't see them covered on cable news networks, or you don't see them covered in the vast majority of the establishment news media, or even in progressive media. There's people who are completely ignoring these developments. And we have sources. We're getting these stories from like the Guardian and Time, but they're just not being dug into in the way that people dig into a presidential primary, or people are digging into the impeachment trial, or people are looking at these other spectacles that are unfolding before our eyes right now. And both of those have some importance. I guess what I'm trying to say is we're trying to compensate as best as we can with this show to cover these important whistleblower stories that deserve attention, and to amplify them and bring them before you. And there are stories that happen that involve whistleblowers that make it into the mainstream, and there's some issues around them, and it's debatable as to what can be said. It was a big deal this past week that Rand Paul wanted to name the whistleblower that's related to the Ukraine call that Donald Trump had, and apparently the Chief Justice John Roberts told Rand Paul no, that you're not allowed to. And then there's all this drama about whether Rand was going to defy Supreme Court Justice Chief John Roberts. I mean, that's an important story, but we don't really have to get into that here on this show, because you could probably turn on CNN and see pundits go on and on about that. So here you see us dig into these stories that are flying under the radar, and that's about what you can expect week to week. That we'll be able to give stories that are not getting a lot of attention a boost, so that we show you that this isn't something that just happens isolated in isolated instances. There are always whistleblowers coming forward trying to expose corruption. And because there's just so much fraud, waste, abuse, and illegality that is happening in this country, as Tom Mueller would put it in his very deeply researched book, Crisis of Conscience, it's because of the systemic corruption that we have in our government that we see so many people coming forward on all levels. And this show is a part of making sure that those individuals don't fall through the cracks, whether they're in private corporations or they're in public agencies in government.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. I really appreciate that. With that being said, I think probably a good place to end it. Kevin, I really appreciate the work that you're doing. Just wanted to remind folks, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, subscribe to us on YouTube, and help us send Kevin to the UK to cover Julian Assange, help us pay our freelancers. We provide opportunities for freelancers in this really horrendous media economy to do reporting that a lot of other outlets won't support them to do. And so all of that is funded by our readers. You could chip in $5, $10. It really makes a difference. So please head on over to shadowproof.com/donate and support us. And once again, Kevin, thank you so much for all you do. And we will pick this up next week. Take care.
Thanks.